Alrighty, folks, I had the opportunity a little bit earlier this week to speak with Jared Kushner. He's the author of a brand new book called Breaking History. He, of course, was a top advisor to President Trump. I wanted to get his views on everything up to and including the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago. This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN. Joining us on the line is Jared Kushner. Jared, of course, was one of the chief advisors, senior advisor to President Trump. Before that, he was CEO of Kushner Companies. He, of course, is also married to Ivanka. They have 3 kids. He has a brand new book out called Breaking History, a White House memoir. Jared, great to talk to you.
Thank you, Ben. Good to be with you.
So let's talk a little bit about the stuff that's happening on the ground right now. Obviously, one of the biggest stories in the country is the FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago. So can you give us a little bit of sort of backstory here? Like, what were the negotiations that led up to the raid? Because what we've heard from the FBI and from the DOJ and from the National Archives, that basically they requested documents, that Trump's lawyers said they were working to give those documents over, that there was some sort of snafu or that there was some sort of screw up, and that this miscommunication basically led to the raid. What exactly is the story here?
Yeah, so I have not been, I wasn't involved with those discussions, so I don't know exactly what was happening back and forth. But what I did, I read about in my book about the Russia investigation, which really was the first instance where the DOJ basically spied on the campaign. And then you had the same people doing the same thing in the same ways. They would leak, salacious things to the press that turned out not to be true ultimately. And so what I found is that, you have to just be very cautious in terms of jumping to conclusions. We saw, a couple of days ago, they were saying, oh, the nuclear codes were there. And then now, they're putting out, different things. So I just think that, I've grown to think that you have to be a little bit more cautious when trusting the government in terms of what their prosecutors a lot of power do. And I hope that people will pause and wait till real facts come out.
Yeah, Jared, this is the thing that I think is so striking, is that when you look at the FBI and the DOJ and the sort of justifications they're making, they do seem to be constantly shifting and moving. And so the question is, what standards should apply? So let's even assume that President Trump did not declassify the materials before he took them home, that he mishandled the classified materials. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, I'm not saying that's the case. You're not saying that's the case. No one's saying that's the case. That's something that's going to be argued, I assume. But let's assume for a second that were the case. The standard that was set by James Comey when he was investigating Hillary's mishandling of classified documentation is that it wasn't enough to just mishandle classified documents. It was that you actually had to have intent to do something bad with the classified documents. I mean, I'm going to read to you what James Comey said at the time he decided not to prosecute Hillary Clinton. Quote, "In looking back at our investigations into mishandling or removal of classified information, we cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts. All the cases prosecuted involved some combination of clearly intentionally and willful mishandling of classified information or vast quantities of materials exposed in such a way as to support an inference of intentional misconduct or indications of disloyalty to the United States or efforts to obstruct justice. We do not see those things here." And so far, all I'm hearing really from the FBI and the DOJ is that they're accusing President Trump of mishandling classified documents by locking them in some sort of storage closet at Mar-a-Lago. They're saying that there wasn't proper protection for that. Hillary's mishandling classified documents was on an actual server that was connected to the actual internet. James Comey admitted that stuff may have been accessed by foreign adversaries, and that still was not prosecutable. So in order to get to the idea that there's something criminally prosecutable here under the Comey standard set under the Hillary indictment or non-indictment, in order to get there, you basically have to assume that President Trump was doing something nefarious with the documents, that this wasn't just a case of Donald Trump wanted to keep copies of these documents for his memoirs, or he just likes documents or whatever else it was. And that seems to be the constant pattern, is the imputing of intent to President Trump that just there's no evidence it exists.
But I think that's kind of the constant evolution, right? First, they say that he's a Russian spy and he's committed treason. Then they investigate for 2 years and drive everyone crazy. Then they say that they impeach him for trying to investigate corruption in Ukraine. I think that this feels to me like it's very rinky-dink. It feels like something that a competent, non-politicized DOJ should have been able to work through with his lawyers if there was information that they wanted to seek. But what this raid has done is, number one, is it's increased the distrust of the federal government, which I think was at an all-time high based on the actual misconduct that occurred to try to get Trump before. And then in addition to that, now people are speculating, the media is chasing to figure out what was in these documents. You're reading things about the president of France and different areas that nobody was talking about before. So all they've done is highlight the situation and probably make it more highly probable that if there was classified information, that will get out. So I think that, again, we just have to really, hope that this isn't just the same thing they've been doing over again. And again, after promising that he was a Russian spy and he's committed treason and all these different things, now they're kind of going after him on paperwork. It seems like they're just going to do whatever it takes to try to get him. But again, he's an outsider. He was a threat to the system. He governed in a way that was very different than than how they were used to somebody governing. And I think that there's a lot of resentment from the Washington class about an outsider who came to Washington and didn't play by their rules.
We'll get to more with Jared Kushner in just 1 second. First, I need to ask you a question. What if there was someone out there who kept a log of every single thing you did, every minute of the day? Not God, not Santa Claus, all the big tech companies and your ISP. All those companies like AT&T or Comcast that are allowed to store logs of every website you've ever visited. They can legally sell that data to anyone, which is why I use ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN reroutes my internet connection through their secure servers, so my internet provider can't see or log what I do online. Now, many of you might be wondering, well, hold up. If I'm routing all my data through a VPN, doesn't that mean the VPN can see what I'm doing? Well, you'd be right to ask that question. Many VPNs claim to have a no logs policy, but they've been caught logging customer activity. ExpressVPN is the only VPN I trust because they use trusted server technology. Alrighty, folks, ExpressVPN is super easy to use. All you have to do is open up your phone, and then you just open up that ExpressVPN app. Mine says not connected, unfortunately. But now, behold, it is connected, and this means my internet activity is protected. They were the first major VPN provider to engineer all of their VPN servers to run in RAM. This makes it impossible for their VPN servers to store any data, including logs of any ExpressVPN customer. You don't have to take my or ExpressVPN's word for it. ExpressVPN is so confident in their no logs claim, they even had one of the biggest assurance firms in the world, PwC, audit their technology. Stop letting people keep logs of what you do online. Visit expressvpn.com/BenYT right now. Find out how you can get 3 months for free. And Jared, one of the things that if you know, you and I talked while you were at the administration. I talked with some of your deputies. I talked to a lot of people who didn't work for you or under you or you yourself who were being quote unquote investigated during Russian collusion. I mean, people's lives were legitimately ruined. I mean, the amount of money and time that was spent in order to go after a bunch of people who had literally nothing to do with skewing the 2016 election in any way, the amount of effort that was spent by the federal government in targeting these people, the amount of time that was wasted is truly extraordinary. And I think that can you lay out what it is like to have the FBI or Robert Mueller or the so-called deep state just decide that you're the target on the basis of effectively zero evidence?
Yeah, so that's, one of the things I try to share in the book is what it's like to be in a situation where you know that you did absolutely nothing wrong, right? We were accused of colluding with Russia. I mean, I would joke that on most days I couldn't even collude with Donald on the campaign. And we go to Washington, I'm reading these press reports that I think are asinine. But then all of a sudden, the Republican-led House, Richard Burr, starts investigating. The Republicans in the Senate, the Republicans in the House, a special counsel is appointed. And the whole media, I mean, these institutions like the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, things that I thought were legitimate news organizations when I was in the private sector, spend 2 years parenting. The noose is tightening. They're getting closer. It's several days. I'd wake up, I'd see a bunch of TV cameras outside my house. I'd call my lawyer and say, "What's going on?" He'd say, "Well, I hear you're getting arrested today." I say, "For what?" And I'd get in my car quickly and try to get to the office so that nothing would happen. But it was a crazy feeling. And at some point you're saying, like, maybe I'm crazy and the rest of the world. But, the biggest news story in the world for 2 years was that we colluded with Russia. And, they spent $35 million. I had, people had nervous breakdowns in the White House. They were bankrupted because they had legal fees that would add up. And it just created an environment where people in the White House really couldn't have the interaction that they wanted to try to do it. But I do think that that's part of the game of Washington, right? So it's a time duration game. You get there, there's a term. They try to stop you, throw sand in your gears and stop you from getting done your promises. And your goal is to try to push forward and get as many things done as possible. So, we learned to adjust and compartmentalize the investigations because they didn't stop just when the Russia thing was debunked and they went to the impeachment and everything else. And again, I think that there's two cross currents I write about in the book. One is these relentless investigations that you read about, the Russia investigation, the impeachment, the media attacks. And then the other current is, how did so many things get done, right? How do we get the biggest trade deal in history done with Mexico and Canada, the second biggest trade deal in history with China? How do we get the biggest bipartisan criminal justice reform done in history? How do we get the fastest vaccine in history done? Trump had unemployment at a 50-year low. Inflation was low. Wages were rising, real wages, and we got peace deals in the Middle East. And now, thanks to the disastrous policies and the weakness of the current administration, you have a war in Russia. China is being provocative in Taiwan, and you just see a world that was moving in a great direction, really going backwards. And so, it's a complicated place. Washington, again, people try to put it through one lens or another, but there's like 1,000 shades of gray. And I really think that it's important for people to understand it so that when they form their opinions on what's good and bad, they're able to get a much more nuanced point of view.
I'm seeing Jared Kushner. His new book is Breaking History, a White House Memoir. So, Jared, I know a lot of people have been looking forward to the possibility President Trump runs again. Let's say that he wins And let's say that he comes into office, given that the first time he came into office, he really knew nothing about the workings of the executive branch. I mean, he never held elective office in his entire life. And suddenly he's the president of the United States, an unprecedented development. And he comes in and he's given an executive branch that has 2 million people working for it, including tens of thousands of people in various departments, many of whom are overtly, as it turns out, hateful of him, who despise him. And this ranges from the nation's most powerful intelligence agencies to places like the State Department. All those people sort of at war with him. When you come into office and you really have no team, because the truth is that President Trump, because his campaign was an outsider campaign, there were really not a lot of political professionals who were there to even tell him who you need to fire. Next time, let's say President Trump gets reelected. Next time he comes in, what would you recommend that he do in order to ensure that there isn't more sand tossed in the gears? Because I think that has to be the chief worry.
Yeah. So let me say this, that when President Trump was running in 2016, a lot of the people we tried to hire for the campaign who were quote unquote experienced were basically telling us that they were being told that if you work with Trump, you will never get a job in Washington again. And that obviously made our jobs a lot harder to find people to do tasks, but we had to innovate and do things differently. But that turned out to be one of our greatest blessings, right? Because for 30 years, you're either part of the Bush team or the Clinton team. And Washington, for 30 years, had become staffed with a lot of these career insiders. So in order to be qualified to be in there, you had to have worked in Washington before, which meant that you were part of that very stale thinking that was sending our soldiers to war, endless wars, that were sending our jobs overseas with bad trade deals. And President Trump reversed it and brought a lot of people in who brought in fresh perspective. I think that what you would see, not only just if it's President Trump, I think with any other Republican that would come in, because I think they learned from Trump not to play by the rules that were kind of stacked against getting done the policies you want to do, is you have to stop playing to get the approval of people who are going to hate you anyway. And you have to liberate yourselves and focus on your policies. I think right now there's a lot of people after the Trump administration who are focused on tactically, how do we get these policies done? It's not about talking points anymore or just doing fundraising emails. There's real serious people who are inspired to leave the private sector, go into now some of these think tanks like America First Policy Institute, and people who are saying, what are the policies we need to actually implement the Trump agenda and figure out how to get it done? So I think that President Trump or anyone else who would come in ready to go. I think that they wouldn't wait 3 years to kind of find their footing. But again, even while Trump was finding his footing and dealing with a lot of these bad people, and that's, again, why my book, I think, goes through a lot of different nuanced things, he still managed to get so much thing done. So a lot of it was just sheer force of will, personality, but also a lot of good decisions. And again, there was bad decisions as well. And I try to be honest about those in the book. But I do think that now President Trump or whoever else would come in would be much more ready to just go savage day one and really try to implement changes and really figure out how to fix these things. Because the one thing I'll say too about our country is that the potential we have is absolutely extraordinary. Unfortunately, we have the wrong policies now, so it's being squandered. But somebody who gets in there, I think they could fix things and turn it around really, really fast. And power globally is a relative thing. Again, I think because of the misguided policies of Bush and Obama getting us into wars, taking their eyes off of China, it kind of, it lessened the gap that America had in the world in the late 90s. But I do think we could regain that position as the dominant global superpower very quickly with just good leadership.
That's Jared Kushner. Check out his brand new book, Breaking History, a White House Memoir. Jared, great to talk to you.
Great, Ben. Thanks to be with you.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, make sure that you leave a comment, and let us know who you'd like to see me interview next time.